Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table at Murphy's Diner, her shift nearly complete after another long day of serving coffee and dealing with difficult customers. The small tattoo on her left wrist caught the fluorescent light as she moved, a simple anchor with the letters USN beneath it, surrounded by delicate waves. Most people never noticed it, hidden as it usually was beneath her uniform sleeves. The diner buzzed with its usual evening crowd of locals, construction workers grabbing dinner, and a group of college students who had claimed the corner booth for the past 2 hours. Sarah had grown accustomed to the rhythm of this place since moving to the small coastal town 6 months ago. It was quiet work, honest work, and exactly what she needed after everything she had been through. As she collected empty plates from table 6, she overheard the college students talking loudly about military service. One young man with perfectly styled hair was holding court, gesturing dramatically as he spoke about how easy military life must be compared to real challenges like college exams and job hunting. I mean, how hard can it really be? He laughed, causing his friends to snicker along. You just follow orders all day. It's not like you need to think for yourself or make real decisions. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she continued clearing tables. She had heard this kind of talk before, and she knew better than to engage. Her manager, Mrs. Chen, had been clear about keeping personal opinions to herself during work hours. The young man continued his monologue, now discussing how military benefits were just handouts and how service members got special treatment they didn't deserve. His voice grew louder with each passing minute, clearly enjoying the attention from his audience. And don't get me started on all those fake veterans walking around with their sob stories, he declared, taking a long sip from his coffee. Half of them probably never even left the country. They just want people to feel sorry for them. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down a stack of plates. The anchor tattoo seemed to burn against her skin, a permanent reminder of the 5 years she had spent in the Navy, including 2 deployments that had changed her life forever. She tried to focus on her work, moving efficiently between tables, but the young man's words continued to echo in her mind. Each dismissive comment felt like a personal attack, not just on her service, but on every man and woman she had served alongside. The diner's atmosphere grew more tense as other customers began to notice the loud conversation. An elderly veteran at the counter shifted uncomfortably on his stool, his American Legion cap casting shadows over his weathered face. A middle-aged woman dining alone kept glancing toward the corner booth, her expression growing more disapproving by the minute. Sarah approached their table to refill water glasses, hoping to move past quickly and avoid confrontation. But as she leaned over to pour water, the sleeve of her uniform rode up slightly, revealing the edge of her tattoo. The young man's eyes immediately locked onto it, and a smirk spread across his face. Well, well, he said loudly enough for half the diner to hear. Looks like our waitress is one of those fake veterans I was talking about. His friends turned to stare at Sarah's wrist, and she quickly pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. The damage was done, and she could feel the weight of every gaze in the restaurant settling on her. That's a cute little tattoo, the young man continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let me guess, you spent a few months in boot camp and now you think you're a hero? Or maybe you just got it to look cool and pick up guys who are into the military thing. Sarah's face flushed red, but she maintained her professional composure. Can I get you anything else? She asked quietly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The young man laughed and looked around the table at his friends, who were now fully engaged in what they saw as entertainment. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Tell us about your service. What did you do, file paperwork? Serve food in the mess hall? The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about the nights she had spent standing watch on the deck of a destroyer, scanning dark waters for threats. She remembered the weight of responsibility she had carried as a sonar technician, knowing that her skills and attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death for her entire crew. But she also remembered the promise she had made to herself when she started this job, to leave the past behind and build a quiet, simple life. Speaking up would only create problems, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. I need to get back to work, she said softly, turning to walk away. But the young man wasn't finished. He called after her, his voice carrying across the now silent diner. That's what I thought. Another fake veteran who can't back up her story. Probably bought that tattoo at some strip mall parlor to impress people. The elderly veteran at the counter stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists. The middle-aged woman had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Even Mrs. Chen had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over, but she forced them back. She had survived much worse than some spoiled college student's ignorant comments. She could survive this too. But as she walked toward the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything. The anchor tattoo on her wrist felt heavier than ever, carrying with it the weight of memories she had tried so hard to bury. Outside, the sun was setting over the small coastal town, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In a few minutes, the evening crowd would begin to arrive, and Sarah would have to continue serving customers as if nothing had happened. She had no way of knowing that among those evening customers would be someone who would turn her world upside down once again, someone who would finally give her the recognition she had never asked for but deeply deserved. Sarah retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter. The young man's laughter still echoed from the dining room, mixed with the uncomfortable murmurs of other customers who had witnessed the exchange. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing, the way she had learned during her years of Navy training. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, concern etched across her face. "Sarah, are you okay? What happened out there?" "It's nothing, Mrs. Chen, just some rude customers. I can handle it." Sarah forced a smile, but her employer wasn't convinced. "Those boys have been causing trouble all evening. Maybe I should ask them to leave." "No, please don't. I don't want any more drama. They'll finish their food and go." Sarah picked up a tray of clean glasses, needing something to occupy her hands. "I just need a few more hours until my shift ends." Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "If they say anything else, you come get me immediately. I won't have customers treating my employees with disrespect." Sarah returned to the dining room with renewed determination. She had faced enemy submarines in the dark depths of the ocean, navigated through dangerous waters during wartime, and earned the respect of some of the toughest sailors in the Navy. She wouldn't let a group of immature college students break her spirit, but as she moved between tables, she could feel their eyes following her every move. The young man's friends kept glancing in her direction and whispering among themselves, occasionally erupting in quiet laughter. Every time she passed their booth, the conversation seemed to pause as if they were discussing her. "Excuse me, miss," the young man called out when Sarah walked by with a coffee pot. "We've been talking, and we're really curious about your military experience. You seem so ordinary, not what we'd expect from a real soldier." Sarah stopped walking but didn't turn around. Other customers were watching now, some with sympathy, others with curiosity about how she would respond. "I was in the Navy, not the Army," she said quietly, still facing away from their table. "Oh, the Navy!" The young man's voice rose with mock excitement. "So you were on one of those big ships. What did you do, swab the decks? Polish the captain's boots?" His friends burst into laughter, and Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. She had operated some of the most sophisticated sonar equipment in the world, tracking enemy vessels and protecting American interests in hostile waters. She had been trusted with classified information and had earned commendations for her service during critical missions. But explaining any of that would mean opening wounds. She had spent months trying to heal. "I was a sonar technician," she said simply, hoping that would end the conversation. "A sonar technician." The young man slapped the table dramatically. "So you sat in front of a computer screen listening to beeps and boops. That's not real combat. That's not real service." The elderly veteran at the counter had heard enough. He turned around on his stool, his American Legion cap slightly askew, and spoke in a voice that commanded attention despite its quietness. "Son, you might want to think carefully about what you're saying. That young lady's job was one of the most important on any naval vessel." The young man looked annoyed at the interruption. "Oh great, another one. Look, old man, I'm sure you have your own war stories, but times have changed. The military isn't what it used to be." "You're right about that," the veteran replied, standing slowly. "It's more dangerous, more complex, and requires more skill than ever before. Sonar technicians like her are the eyes and ears of the entire fleet. They detect threats that could sink ships and kill hundreds of sailors." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the stranger, but she also felt exposed. She had come to this small town specifically to avoid conversations like this, to escape the weight of her past, and the expectations that came with her service record. The young man wasn't backing down. "Look, I appreciate your support for the troops and all that, but let's be realistic here. How dangerous could her job really have been? She's working in a diner now instead of using all those amazing skills you're talking about." The words stung because they contained a grain of truth that Sarah wrestled with every day. She had been one of the best sonar technicians in her unit, with skills that had taken years to develop and perfect. But after her final deployment, after everything that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to continue in that world. Sometimes good people leave good careers for reasons that have nothing to do with their abilities, the veteran said carefully, and sometimes they need time to heal before they can move forward. Sarah looked at the old man with surprise. His words suggested he understood more about her situation than she had revealed to anyone in this town. The middle-aged woman who had been dining alone finally spoke up from her table near the window. "I think you boys have said enough. You're making everyone uncomfortable." "We're just having a conversation," the young man protested. "It's a free country, right? Isn't that what they fought for?" "They didn't fight so you could disrespect the people who served," she replied firmly. "They fought so you could have the freedom to get an education, to sit in that booth eating good food and to speak your mind without fear. The least you could do is show some gratitude." The young man's friends were beginning to look uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. What had started as entertaining mockery was becoming a serious confrontation with multiple customers defending Sarah. "Fine, whatever," the young man said, waving his hand dismissively. "We'll finish our food and go. But I still think there are a lot of people walking around pretending to be heroes when they're really just looking for sympathy and special treatment." Sarah set down the coffee pot on a nearby table, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and emotion. She had tried to remain professional, but something inside her was breaking down. The young man's words weren't just attacking her service. They were attacking every person who had struggled to transition back to civilian life. Every veteran who had been wounded in ways that weren't visible. Every service member who had sacrificed more than civilians could understand. As she stood there in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by customers who had witnessed her humiliation, Sarah felt more alone than she had since arriving in this town. The anchor tattoo on her wrist seemed to pulse with the weight of memories she'd been trying to forget. But outside, unknown to everyone in the diner, a black sedan was pulling into the parking lot. The man stepping out wore civilian clothes, but his bearing and the precision of his movements marked him as military. He had stopped for dinner during a long drive, choosing this small-town diner randomly from the highway signs. He had no idea that his simple decision to grab a meal would change the life of a young woman inside, or that he was about to witness something that would remind him why he had dedicated his life to serving his country and protecting the people who served under him. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed softly as a tall man in his 40s stepped inside. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command, his sharp eyes automatically scanning the room as he paused near the hostess station. Despite wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a simple button-down shirt, there was something unmistakably military about his posture and the way he carried himself. Commander James Richardson had been driving for 6 hours straight, heading home from a training exercise at a base 3 states away. The small coastal town had appeared just as his fuel gauge was approaching empty, and Murphy's Diner had seemed like the perfect place to grab a quick meal before completing the final stretch of his journey. But as he stood waiting to be seated, he immediately sensed the tension in the room. Conversations were muted, and several customers kept glancing toward a corner booth, where a group of young men sat. An elderly veteran was standing near the counter, his hands clenched at his sides, while a young waitress stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, holding a coffee pot with shaking hands. "Is everything all right in here?" Commander Richardson asked quietly when Mrs. Chen approached with a menu. "Just some difficult customers," she replied, but her worried expression suggested it was more serious than she was letting on. "Would you prefer a booth or counter seating?" "Counter's fine." He settled onto a stool, positioning himself where he could observe the entire restaurant. Years of military training had taught him to assess situations quickly, and everything about this scene suggested a conflict in progress. The young waitress was clearly distressed, though she was trying to maintain her composure. The elderly veteran looked ready to intervene physically if necessary, and from the corner booth, Commander Richardson could hear fragments of, Conversation that made his jaw tighten with recognition and anger. Probably never saw any real action. Just trying to get attention with that fake tattoo. These military wannabes are everywhere. Commander Richardson had heard this type of ignorant commentary before, usually from people who had never sacrificed a single day in service to their country. But hearing it directed at a young woman who was clearly struggling to maintain her dignity made his protective instincts flare. He watched as Sarah tried to continue working, moving between tables with mechanical precision, while the college students continued their verbal assault. Every few minutes, one of them would make another comment loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, clearly enjoying the spectacle they were creating. "Miss," Commander Richardson called quietly to Sarah as she passed behind the counter, "could I get a cup of coffee when you have a moment?" Sarah looked up, and for a brief instant their eyes met. Commander Richardson saw something in her gaze that he had learned to recognize during his years leading sailors. The look of someone fighting an internal battle, trying to hold themselves together under pressure. "Of course, sir. Right away." Her voice was professional but strained. As Sarah poured his coffee, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of her tattoo. Commander Richardson's trained eye immediately caught the familiar anchor and letters, and his expression shifted from casual interest to intense focus. "That's a Navy tattoo," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Sarah's hand stilled for a moment, then she quickly pulled her sleeve down. "Yes, sir. What was your rate?" The question was asked with the tone of someone who knew the military inside and out. "ST2, sir. Sonar technician, second-class petty officer." The response came automatically, despite her obvious reluctance to discuss her service. Commander Richardson nodded slowly. "How long?" "5 years, sir. 2 deployments." Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. From the corner booth, the young man's voice rose again. "Hey, waitress. We're ready for our check, unless you're too busy playing soldier with your new friend over there." The comment carried across the restaurant, causing several customers to turn and stare. The elderly veteran took a step forward, but Commander Richardson raised his hand slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both authority and a request for patience. "What unit were you with?" Commander Richardson asked Sarah, ignoring the disruption. "USS Leyte Gulf, sir." "Guided missile cruiser." Commander Richardson's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. He knew that ship, knew its deployment history, and knew the kind of operations it had been involved in during recent years. Any sailor who had served aboard that vessel had seen real action and handled responsibilities that most people couldn't imagine. "The Leyte Gulf," he repeated thoughtfully. "You were there during the Red Sea incidents?" Sarah's face went pale and she nodded almost imperceptibly. Those incidents were classified, not something that would be discussed in civilian settings. But Commander Richardson's knowledge of them told her everything she needed to know about who she was speaking with. "Yes, sir," she whispered. From the corner booth, the harassment continued. "What's the holdup over there? We don't have all night to wait while you two swap your fake war stories." The young man's friends laughed, but the sound was becoming more nervous than amused. Other customers were openly staring now, their expressions ranging from sympathy for Sarah to outright hostility toward the college students. Commander Richardson set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. The Red Sea incidents that Sarah had referenced were among the most dangerous naval operations of recent years, involving the detection and tracking of enemy submarines in hostile waters. The sonar technicians on those missions had been the difference between successful operations and potential disasters that could have cost hundreds of lives. "ST2 Martinez," he said quietly, reading the name tag on Sarah's uniform. "You did good work on those deployments." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she fought to hold back. She had been carrying the weight of those missions alone for months, unable to talk about them with anyone who would understand. Hearing acknowledgement from someone who clearly knew what she had been through felt like a dam breaking inside her chest. "Thank you." "Sir?" she managed to say. The young man in the corner booth was growing more agitated by the lack of attention. "Seriously, what is this, some kind of military reunion? Can we get some service over here?" Commander Richardson turned on his stool to face the booth directly. His movement was calm and controlled, but there was something in his bearing that caused conversations throughout the restaurant to stop completely. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded ships and led sailors through life and death situations. "I'll be right with you," he said, his tone pleasant but with an underlying steel that made the young man's smirk falter slightly. Sarah sensed that something significant was about to happen. The man sitting at the counter wasn't just another customer who supported the military. Everything about his knowledge of her ship and missions, his bearing, and his response to the situation marked him as someone with serious military credentials. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now, as if everyone sensed that they were about to witness something important. Even Mrs. Chen had stopped what she was doing in the kitchen, drawn by the sudden change in atmosphere. Commander Richardson stood slowly, his 6'2" frame commanding attention as he prepared to address the young man who had been tormenting Sarah. What happened next would change not only Sarah's evening, but her entire perspective on her place in the world and the value of her service. As the college student's car pulled out of the parking lot, Commander Richardson turned back to Sarah with an expression that had shifted from stern authority to genuine warmth. The elderly veteran stepped closer and other customers began to approach, creating a supportive circle around the young woman who had endured so much ridicule just minutes before. "Petty Officer Martinez," Commander Richardson said, his voice now gentle but still carrying military precision. "I have something I need to do, and I need you to stand at attention." Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. Despite being in civilian clothes and working in a diner, her body straightened into perfect military posture, shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward. The muscle memory of 5 years of service brought her to attention without conscious thought. Commander Richardson stepped back slightly and, in full view of everyone in the restaurant, brought his hand up in a crisp military salute. His voice carried clearly through the silent dining room as he spoke the words that every service member deserves to hear. "Thank you for your service, Petty Officer. Your sacrifice and dedication protected this nation and saved countless lives. You served with honor." The moment stretched out, profound and moving, as Sarah returned the salute with tears streaming down her face. For the first time since leaving the Navy, she felt the full weight and meaning of what she had accomplished during her years of service. The elderly veteran immediately stepped forward and offered his own salute. "Thank you, young lady." From one veteran to another, welcome home. Throughout the restaurant, something remarkable began to happen. Other customers stood up from their tables, and those who had served in the military offered their own salutes. Even civilians placed their hands over their hearts or simply stood in respectful silence, recognizing the significance of the moment. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, tears in her eyes as she watched her employee receive the recognition she deserved. The middle-aged woman who had spoken up earlier was crying openly, moved by the display of respect and solidarity. "I had no idea," Mrs. Chen said softly when the salutes ended. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me about your service?" Sarah wiped her eyes, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I didn't think it mattered anymore. I just wanted to be normal, to blend in and not have to think about the past." Commander Richardson shook his head firmly. "Your service always matters. It's part of who you are, and it's nothing to hide from or be ashamed of. You've earned the right to wear that tattoo proudly." The elderly veteran, who introduced himself as Frank Peterson, Army veteran of Vietnam, pulled up a stool next to the counter. "Can I tell you something, young lady? I tried to hide my service for years after I came home. Thought it would be easier to just be a regular civilian, but you can't run from who you are and you shouldn't want to." "Frank's right," Commander Richardson agreed. "The transition to civilian life is difficult for everyone, but it's especially hard when you've carried the kind of responsibilities you've carried. You protected other people for 5 years. That changes you in ways that civilians don't always understand." Sarah looked around the restaurant at the faces surrounding her, all supportive now, all understanding. "I just felt so out of place, like I didn't belong anywhere. In the military, I knew who I was and what I was supposed to do. Out here, I felt lost." "That feeling doesn't have to be permanent," Commander Richardson said. "You have skills and experience that are valuable in civilian careers. But more than that, you have character and integrity that were forged under pressure. Those qualities matter everywhere you go." Mrs. Chen stepped forward with determination. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud to have a veteran working here. And if you ever want to talk about your service or need help with anything, you just let me know." The middle-aged woman approached the counter, extending her hand to Sarah. "My name is Linda Thompson. My son is deployed overseas right now, and seeing what you went through tonight, and how you handled it with such grace, it gives me hope that people will treat him with respect when he comes home." Sarah shook her hand. feeling a connection to this stranger whose son was currently serving somewhere far from home. What branch is your son in? Navy, like you. He's on a destroyer in the Pacific. I worry about him every day. Sarah smiled for the first time all evening. Destroyers have excellent crews and some of the best sonar techs in the fleet. Your son is in good hands. Linda's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know, hearing it from someone who's been there. Commander Richardson watched this exchange with satisfaction. This was exactly what Sarah needed. To remember that her experience and knowledge had value, that she could still contribute and help others even outside of active service. St2 Martinez, he said formally. I have a proposition for you. I know the naval base about 50 miles north of here is looking for civilian contractors with sonar experience. It's not active duty, but it would use your skills and put you around people who understand your background. Sarah's eyes widened with interest and possibility. Really? I didn't know they hired civilians for technical work. They do, especially experienced technicians like yourself. The pay is good, the work is meaningful, and you'd be around other veterans who've made the transition to civilian roles. Would you be interested? For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of excitement about the future. Yes, sir. I'd be very interested. Frank clapped his hands together with enthusiasm. That's the spirit. And let me tell you something. This town needs more people like you. People with integrity and a sense of service. You don't hide that anchor tattoo anymore, you hear me? You wear it proudly. Sarah looked down at her wrist where the tattoo that had caused her so much embarrassment was now visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve. The anchor and the letters USN suddenly looked different to her, not like marks of shame or reminders of a past she was trying to escape, but like symbols of honor and accomplishment. Commander Richardson approached the corner booth with measured steps, his presence filling the space around him like a gathering storm. The college students looked up with varying expressions, the ringleader still wearing his smirk of superiority, while his friends appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the attention their table was receiving. Gentlemen, Commander Richardson said, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about military service. The young man straightened slightly, trying to maintain his cocky demeanor. Yeah, so? It's a free country. We can talk about whatever we want. Absolutely, Commander Richardson agreed, his tone remaining perfectly pleasant. Freedom of speech is one of the fundamental rights that military personnel take an oath to protect. I'm curious, though, about your expertise on the subject. Have you ever served? No, but I don't need to serve to have an opinion. I read the news. I see what's happening in the world. Most military jobs are just regular jobs with fancy uniforms. Commander Richardson nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this perspective seriously. That's an interesting viewpoint. What do you study in college? Business administration, the young man replied proudly. I'll be graduating next year and starting at my father's company. Real work with real responsibilities. Congratulations. That's quite an achievement. Commander Richardson's tone remained completely neutral. I'm sure your father's proud. Tell me, in your business studies, have you learned about risk management? The question seemed to catch the young man off guard. Of course. It's basic business theory. Excellent. Then you'll appreciate this. Commander Richardson turned slightly, ensuring his voice would carry to Sarah behind the counter. Petty Officer Martinez there spent 5 years managing risks that most people can't even imagine. As a sonar technician aboard the USS Lady Gulf, she was responsible for detecting enemy submarines in some of the most dangerous waters in the world. The young man's smirk began to fade as Commander Richardson continued. Every day she went to work. She knew that a single mistake in reading her equipment could result in her ship being sunk and her entire crew being killed. 250 sailors depended on her ability to hear threats that were trying to stay hidden. She worked 12-hour shifts in a windowless room, listening for sounds that could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. No one had ever described her job that way, with such understanding of what it had really meant. But here's the part that might interest a future businessman like yourself, Commander Richardson said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. During her second deployment, Petty Officer Martinez identified and tracked an enemy submarine that was positioning itself to attack a supply convoy carrying food and medical supplies to Allied forces. Her detection work prevented what could have been one of the worst naval disasters in recent history. The college students exchanged uncomfortable glances. Other customers throughout the restaurant were listening intently, and the young man was beginning to realize that he had seriously misjudged the situation. "I don't know anything about that," he said weakly. "Of course you don't," Commander Richardson replied, "because Petty Officer Martinez and sailors like her do their jobs in silence, without recognition, protecting people who will never even know their names. They don't do it for praise or special treatment. They do it because they understand that some things are worth sacrificing for." The elderly veteran at the counter had moved closer, his American Legion cap now straight and his posture reflecting decades of military bearing. Other customers were nodding in approval, and the young man's friends were sliding lower in their seats, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "Look, I didn't mean any disrespect," the young man said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Didn't you?" Commander Richardson's tone sharpened. "Because from where I was sitting it sounded like you were mocking a decorated veteran who earned her tattoo through 5 years of honorable service to her country. It sounded like you were questioning her integrity and suggesting she was lying about her service." Sarah stepped forward slightly, drawn by the gravity of the conversation despite her desire to remain in the background. She had never heard anyone defend her service with such precision and authority. "Who are you anyway?" the young man demanded, trying to regain some of his lost bravado. "What makes you such an expert on military service?" Commander Richardson reached into his wallet and pulled out a small leather case. He opened it and placed it on the table in front of the college students. Inside was a military identification card and a collection of ribbons and insignia that spoke of years of distinguished service. "Commander James Richardson, United States Navy," he said simply. "I've been serving my country for 22 years. I've commanded ships, led sailors through combat operations, and had the honor of working with some of the finest people who ever wore the uniform." The young man stared at the identification, his face growing pale as the reality of the situation sank in. He had spent the evening mocking a veteran in front of a Navy commander. "And in all those years," Commander Richardson continued, "I've learned that the real measure of a person isn't how loudly they talk about their accomplishments, but how quietly they carry their responsibilities." Petty Officer Martinez carried hers with distinction. The restaurant was now completely silent except for the soft hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Every customer, every employee was focused on the drama playing out in the corner booth. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or anger. They were tears of recognition, of finally being seen and understood by someone who knew what her service had really meant. Commander Richardson closed his identification case and returned it to his wallet. "Now I believe you wanted to pay your check and leave?" The young man nodded quickly, fumbling for his wallet while his friends avoided eye contact with everyone in the restaurant. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Where moments before they had been the center of attention for their cruel entertainment, they were now the objects of disapproval from every person in the room. As they hastily counted out money for their bill, Commander Richardson returned to the counter where Sarah stood watching with wide eyes. The elderly veteran approached as well, creating an informal circle of understanding around her. "St2 Martinez," Commander Richardson said formally, "I want you to know that your service mattered. It saved lives, protected freedom, and honored your country. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion that was threatening to overwhelm her. For months she had felt like she was carrying her military experience as a burden, something that set her apart from normal life. But standing in this small-town diner, surrounded by people who finally understood, she began to remember why she had been proud to serve. The young man and his friends left quickly, their exit marked by the uncomfortable silence of people who knew they had been thoroughly humiliated. As the door closed behind them, the normal sounds of the restaurant began to return, but the atmosphere remained charged with the significance of what had just occurred. Commander Richardson wasn't finished, though. He had one more thing to do that would complete Sarah's transformation, from a woman hiding from her past to someone ready to embrace her identity as a veteran. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the control room of the Naval Weapons Station, her civilian contractor badge hanging proudly around her neck. The familiar sounds of sonar equipment filled the air around her as she trained a new group of young sailors on advanced detection techniques. Her experience aboard the USS Leyte Gulf had translated perfectly to her new role as a senior sonar instructor. The phone call from Commander Richardson had changed everything. Within 2 weeks of their meeting at Murphy's Diner, she had interviewed for the contractor position and been hired immediately. The base commander, impressed by her service record and Commander Richardson's recommendation, had offered her a role that was both challenging and rewarding. "Remember," Sarah told the young sailors gathered around the sonar console, "you're not just listening for sounds. You're listening for patterns, for changes, for the things that don't belong. Your shipmates are counting on you to be their eyes and ears under the water." One of the sailors, a young woman not much older than Sarah had been when she first enlisted, raised her hand. "Instructor Martinez, how do you stay focused during those long watches? Sometimes the hours just blend together." Sarah smiled, remembering asking the same question during her own training years ago. "You remember why you're here? Every ping you analyze, every contact you track, every report you file, it all matters. You're protecting people who will never know your name, and that's exactly how it should be." After the training session ended, Sarah walked to her office overlooking the harbor. The walls were decorated with commendations from her Navy service, photos from her deployments, and a framed copy of the newspaper article that had been written about her story at Murphy's Diner. The local reporter had somehow heard about the incident and had written a piece about veterans in the community that had brought attention to the challenges many service members faced during their transition to civilian life. Her anchor tattoo was clearly visible now, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves. She had followed Frank Peterson's advice and wore it proudly, finding that it often sparked conversations with other veterans who recognized the symbol and shared their own stories of service. The door to her office opened, and Commander Richardson stepped inside. He was wearing his dress uniform today, having just completed an inspection of the facility's security procedures. "How are the new recruits coming along, Sarah?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "They're good kids, eager to learn and willing to work hard, a lot like I was at their age." Sarah leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how much her life had changed. "Commander, I never properly thanked you for what you did that night at the diner." "You don't need to thank me. I just reminded people of what they should have already known, that your service mattered. It was more than that, though. You helped me remember who I was, what I was capable of. I had been hiding from my past instead of building on it." Commander Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "A lot of veterans go through that struggle. The transition is hard, and sometimes civilians don't understand what we've experienced, but that doesn't mean we should diminish what we've accomplished." Sarah's computer chimed with an incoming email. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "It's from Linda Thompson. Her son made it home safely from his deployment last week. She sends me updates every few weeks." "The woman from the diner?" "Yes, we've stayed in touch. She's been organizing support groups for military families in the area. She asked me to speak to them about what it's like to serve." "Are you going to do it?" Sarah nodded confidently. "I am. A few months ago, I would have been terrified to talk about my service. Now I understand that sharing those experiences helps other people, both military families and veterans who might be struggling with their own transitions." Commander Richardson stood to leave, then paused at the door. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. I spoke with the captain of the USS Lady Gulf last week. He remembers you well, and he wanted you to know that the work you did during those Red Sea operations earned you a Navy Achievement Medal. The paperwork got delayed due to classified protocols, but it's being processed now." Sarah felt her eyes widen with surprise. "I had no idea. Good work often goes unrecognized in the moment, but it doesn't go unnoticed. Your commanding officers knew what you had accomplished, even if they couldn't tell you at the time." After Commander Richardson left, Sarah sat alone in her office, looking out at the harbor where naval vessels moved through the water with purpose and precision. She thought about the young man from the diner, wondering if he had learned anything from their encounter, or if he continued to dismiss the service of others. She hoped he had learned something, but she realized that his opinion no longer mattered to her in the way it once had. She had found her place again, surrounded by people who understood and valued her experience. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Frank Peterson, who had become something of a mentor and friend over the past few months. "Coffee at Murphy's tomorrow? Mrs. Chen wants to show off the new military appreciation wall she's putting up in the diner." Sarah smiled and typed back her response. "Absolutely. I'll be there." As she prepared to leave work for the day, Sarah rolled up her sleeves without thinking about it. her anchor tattoo visible and unremarkable to her now. She had learned that true strength wasn't about hiding who you were or diminishing your accomplishments to make others comfortable. It was about standing proud of what you had earned and using your experience to help others. Walking through the base toward her car, Sarah noticed a young sailor sitting alone on a bench, staring out at the water with the distant look she recognized from her own difficult days. She changed direction and approached the young man. "Mind if I sit down?" she asked gently. The sailor looked up, surprised to see a civilian contractor speaking to him. "Sure, ma'am." "You look like you're carrying something heavy," Sarah observed. "Sometimes it helps to talk about it." The young sailor studied her for a moment, then noticed her tattoo and the military bearing that never quite left former service members. "Are you prior Navy, ma'am?" 5 years. Sonar tech. "And you don't have to call me ma'am. My name's Sarah." As they talked, Sarah realized that her story had come full circle. She had moved from being someone who needed support and recognition to someone who could provide it to others. The anchor tattoo on her wrist no longer felt like a burden from the past, but like a bridge between her experience and her future. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah Martinez, veteran instructor and proud member of her community, walked toward her car with a sense of purpose and belonging that she hadn't felt since the day she first put on her Navy uniform. She had found her way home, not by forgetting who she had been, but by embracing everything that had made her who she was.